Okay, so thank you all to all of you for joining to this session. And what I'm going to do first is a small presentation, and then we can discuss. I think some of the things that I'm going to touch have been touched in the previous sessions. So it's I'm also glad to see that there's a lot of people working in this kind of stuff, because sometimes you can feel like, or in my case, I can feel that I'm kind of alone. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so to start, a little about me. I'm a PhD candidate at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology in Norway, obviously. I'm working on the subject of the circular economy and also future studies and how the circular economy will impact the everyday life of people. So, but in this presentation, what I'm questioning is about resource access in some way of framing the circular economy. In one of the many ways of framing the circular economy. So to start, for those of you who are not so familiar with the term of the circular economy, but I think most people are, because it's a concept that it's pretty much in almost every design practice now, that the fact that you have to be circular. So I will start with two metaphors, and the first one is the one of the line or the linear economy, that it's supposed to be the thing that the circular economy it's counteracting, or the thing that the circular economy it's improving by including the circularity. Then this way of thinking, or this way of doing things, it's supposed to be counteracted. And this metaphor of the line, what its base is in the idea that in industrial modern societies, the processes of production, consumption, and waste production have been separated, and they even structure how we live. So for example, we live and we consume in cities that are usually separated from manufacture and production, and are also separated from waste, or the place where the waste goes to. So just the current case, or the contemporary case, is that most of our production comes from a place abroad that we have no idea where the products are coming, and we are using them in our everyday life, and then we are just producing waste and throwing them without thinking. So that's the idea that the circular economy is supposed to improve. Then, of course, it's the metaphor of the circle. So the idea that you can bring together waste and production, and so you can use the residues, or you can use what is waste to make new production. So you can continuously be feeding the system of consumption. So consumption, in a way, it's getting what it's produced, but at the same time, it's giving the material for new production. So it's kind of the idea of it's based on the idea of nature using its own resources. But this is a very beautiful idea, and that's why I think there has to be made a distinction about material circularity and about the circular economy, because material circularity is what I have said before about this idea of using resources to produce anew, while the circular economy it's a political project, and it's a project that has been pushed forward in the last 10 years, especially in Europe, in the European Union, with a specific program of how they want to continue using resources, have some sort of approach to resources And we can see, for example, this graphic here, that that's about the publications of the circular economy in indexed publications in this in Escopus. So it's academic publishing, and you can see, for example, that the term the circular economy was not so important until you could say the first this first event that happened in 2009, that was that China had its circular economy promotion law. So China had, of course, in the context of China, it makes sense because they wanted to get resources from other countries to use all the production that they are giving to the world. So all these products that they are doing, so they needed material to recycle and to use. But then in 2015, there was the Circular Economy Action Plan by the European Union. And that's when the explosion of the concept that went like crazy. And we can see it in the last 5 years, all these ideas that everything will be circular and we have to start thinking circular, and we as designers have to become circular economists in a way. But then again, it's easy, the circular part, it's easy, but the economical part is not so easy, because what's the economical part? What's the change that the circular economy is making? Then, as a discourse, we can see that in the European version of the circular economy, it has been about resource security, a lot about technical solutions, because as I said before, it's about this use of materials, that's the easy part that people can understand, and also that it's an apolitical project, or it seems to be an apolitical project. So it's something that you can easily like. For most people, it's easily likable. So designers can take this very easily. So we are just working on the technical part. We are just working with resources. It's not a social issue. And it has been criticized, of course, by many other authors in the academic literature, especially that this is weak sustainability. However, as we speak now, for example, in Norway, where I'm based, a lot of talk is going about how to create a political strategy for the circular economy to become the mainstream version of the economy. And if you read here, this in order to maintain the value of products, materials, and resources for as long as possible, and that you can say it's a beautiful idea if you disconnect it from the social part of it, from how this is going to be, how materials will be distributed among different people. And of course, it is based on ideas of efficient use of resources, which have also been criticized in a lot of literature about sustainability, these ideas of making things efficient. And I put here this because in Norwegian it says effective, and because there's no word, there's no translation for efficient or effective from Norwegian, but you know it's efficient, what they are referring to. But then there is also this recognition that there are multiple circular economies. There is not just one possible version, and that's because of this distinction between material circularity and the political economic project that supports it. So in the case of Norway, for example, it's a lot about the sharing economy, economic decoupling, which means the decoupling from the environmental damage, and also about green growth, or the service, and also a lot of it is about providing services. And I wanted to take this other concept of value capture as that is very important, because it's almost repeated a lot by very important actors. For example, the Ellen MacArthur Foundation for Europe, they talk a lot about value capture. So the circular economy, it's about value capture. So you can have a business model based on the circular economy, and you can continue making profit. So it is, in a way, it is a capitalistic circular economy that they are proposing. And in those capitalistic circular economies, as in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, I heard this very recently, someone saying there's no role for consumers. But what they are referring is that that companies are the ones that have to change to become to use materials in a way that is circular. But using materials in a way that it's circular, it implies more, because in each stage of what they propose, they are including businesses as middlemen between people and the resources they live with or the resources they use. And it's not, and this is a no-brainer. I mean, you don't need to think very deeply why these strategic partners they have are big companies, are not the small companies, or they are not thinking a circular economy for the small companies. Then, of course, it's a technomodernist view of the economy, and for example, this is from a speech last year from the Minister of Climate and Environment in Norway, and this was a very interesting. I mean, the way he framed it, it's this idea of it's not about limiting yourself to all technology. So, and he was talking that the circular economy has to go and go, has the potential to permit businesses to keep growing and keep producing and keep innovating forever. Like this idea of you can grow forever. And of course, the government in Norway, they are trying to come to this strategy, national strategy for the circular economy. Their main provider of knowledge is this consultancy, this big consultancy, Deloitte. And they even have these new 10 principles for businesses to become circular. Then, and getting to the point of what I wanted to talk in this session, it's about resource access, because in the circular economy, it's said that, or in this version of the circular economy, that to me it's kind of a Trojan horse of capitalism. It's this idea of servitization, so product service systems, where they say that you have to change ownership. But what does it mean, changing ownership? Does it mean, for example, that everything that you use to support your life, or all the objects that you use will be owned by a company that will have not only a responsibility over them, but will also decide who can access or not. Then also, who cares for the materials? As it is now, it appears to be that it's the only possible alternative. It's private companies, while there could be a strong integration of the state, which is something that is not talked, or the public institutions. Then who's in charge of this distribution? And I bring this because, for example, there is this small capture that I did from a case in the Ellen MacArthur Foundation website, where they talk about the application of Internet of Things as the technology that will enable product monitoring, which I think it's some kind of, in a way, it's a kind of control and operation by design. So just imagine if everything you own, everything you have, it's controlled by a company that wants to know if you are using it the right way of it. Because basically what you are going to be doing is licensing your life, or your licensing your existence to a company through the idea that you are giving, or that you are having a better relation with the environment by using the resources in a more efficient way. So so the circular economy can be seen as a Trojan horse. Then, and I have these questions. So the circular economy without a political, the circular economy without a political economy, of course, can create problems. For example, a social divide around material access. So, because raw materials with the best physical characteristics will be very expensive, while materials that have been downgraded, that have gone many cycles, will be cheaper. So of course you probably will have these two ways of accessing materials. Some people will have raw good materials, physical materials, and some others will have downgraded materials. So that I think that will also bring a social divide. Also, who will control these resources, and why are states not talking about their responsibility with the citizens? I think part of this will go into rethinking about limits and politicization of how resources are used, which is, I think, is something that is not talked, but in this limiting and politicization of design, of the circular economy, and these are the two questions that I want you to talk. What role would design and designers play in creating another kind of circular economy that is politicized in a different way, that is not capitalistic? And what's to be negotiated by designers? And by that I mean, for example, in the education of design, when designers can or should think that they don't have all these permissions to just design and create whatever they want for a company to profit from. Yep, and that's my presentation. So I want to hear your ideas or fight me if you have the opposite idea. So yeah, Joanna.
Okay, thank you. I'm so glad to see you working in this way on this topic. Because it's just so depoliticized all too often. And in fact, I teach it to my undergraduates, and I'm basically forced to teach it in a depoliticized way. I'm really not given very much scope. And I find that obviously.
Really? Wow.
I mean, it's just, it's a absolute battle. Like, and I am up for the struggle. Like, I've been struggling my whole life on environmental issues, and
I'll join the struggle.
Like, to try to teach like anything on the environment. I've got to be careful of what I say in a conversation where I don't know everybody, but it's extremely difficult. It's extremely difficult. It's like, and so yeah, any sort of resources and work that will help make it more, like, make it easier to try to politicize this space a bit when we're in spaces where it's, it's still it's seen as like the that'll solve it as soon as we sort of roll out this method, supposedly. So anyway, nice work. I'd really like to see, I hope you can post the slideshow, or we'll see the video, because I'd like to have another look afterwards.
Yeah, I have told other people, but I'm also helping in the course of sustainable design at the Department of Design here at NTNU, and it's I see these students when they try to talk about resources and that, and I think from a Norwegian perspective, it's very easy to think, for example, in in everybody accessing everything, because the state has plays a big role here in ensuring that everybody has access to things. But when I think about this expanding, for example, because I fear a lot what kind of version of the circular economy will get to Latin America, which is where I come from, because there the social inequalities are bigger. And I fear a lot how, I mean, I have seen examples of the term of the circular economy being used, for example, in buildings. People proposing to build these circular communities that will be completely secluded from the rest of the city, so you can work, live, and have everything there. Like, but it's using this term.
I would just want to
Simon.
Sorry. Oh, can I? Yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, I thought that was brilliant. I thought that was a really, really kind of to the point critique of the whole circular economy thing. From my point of view, I think it was really wonderful. And so really good to see that. I can see all sorts of things. There's just too many things to discuss in a short session like this, but even just you talking about the global aspect of this and thinking about, you know, in the same way they have a kind of global division of labor, this idea of a global division of the circular economy, you know, who gets the downgraded materials, which parts of the world get the sort of the things that have been through the process. There's so many implications in it that I think it's something that obviously needs to be you know, followed up on in whatever way we can. But I just wanted to say, yeah, also it was a really fascinating talk. And I wonder also, just on the state role, I wonder what people like Mariana Mazzucato would kind of have in relation to things like this. You know, people who really advocate for the role of innovation of the state in things. You know, just interesting perspectives on like how you take it away from the ownership of private companies and all that kind of thing. So yeah, too many things, but just really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to say more of a comment that it's great to see you looking at the circular economy from a kind of a political and kind of economic context, because I think most of the work I see is very technical. It's the same with sustainable development. So a typical sustainability director in a company has an engineering background. So it's really focused on the engineering and the technology aspects rather than the questions you're asking around who's going to benefit, who is this for. Obviously, I have I'm very interested in the aspect around kind of how, you know, who's in control and who's serving and who has a say in how this process works. I guess a question I'd ask is, have you been able to look at the circular economy within a different frame than capitalism? That may not be possible, but that's kind of where I would be interested in trying further, because if we're still placing it within capitalism, there's a discussion that's kind of silenced, which is it's still problematic, right? Because you still it still requires bringing more and more and more stuff into the circle. It's not going to just be a closed loop. So I don't know if you have it, you know, you didn't get a chance to present on that, but that's happened. If not, and otherwise, I would love to chat more about that kind of approach.
Yeah, actually, that's good that you're here, that you mentioned that, because when you were talking about the principles of the commons, I was thinking of, yeah, that's probably the alternative that I'm looking for to apply for the circular economy. But then a common circular economy would be a very different thing. I saw recently a paper published by someone from Italy, Patrizia Ghisolini. I think it was about revisiting the circular economy, but from Keynes. Keynes, yeah. Role of the state and that. I think it's interesting. I didn't go deep into the article, but I think so. People are questioning also what the role of the state will be there.
Yeah, and my entire professional history is based on the Keynesian multiplier, so I know a lot about Keynes. So send that article my way. But I think that you know, in light of what Simon mentioned with the state, is there's always this happens. You know, I didn't talk about this at all in the commons discussion, but in the scholars talking about the term commonism as a term of an ideology around the commons versus communism with a U. There's two principal differentiators. One is around what is the role of the state versus people? And one of the problems around communism and how it's tainted is because it had a very strong statist role. And that obviously is a pretty tarnished image at this point. And so one of the, I think, these questions we have is there's a role of the state, but what is that role of the state versus the role of people? And that's kind of, I think, where a lot of people there's a bit of a kind of friction and kind of discussion around that topic.
Yeah, and when I think about this role of the state, because I don't know if the state has to take an active role. Like, for example, here in Norway, in the case that I have more closer, which is the for example, in the city that I live, it's Trondheim, the municipality, they want to take a more active approach to doing things, but related to reducing consumption. But then at the same time, they don't do it because they say it's not their social role. So they will be taking away opportunities for the private sector. So they fear that, and they fear that they will not have the political backup of the citizenship if they take an opportunity that the private sector would have created a business or a service.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, the thing is, you've also mentioned there's lots of places where the state is not very strong, and the state isn't going to have a role. This, in many ways, the majority of the world, and majority of the world's population, does not live in countries with strong, well-functioning states. So it can often be a kind of a global north perspective around this wonderful state that's going to lead us. But actually, in a lot of places, it is on people to manage that space that's kind of left by the absence of a strong, functional state.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. I don't want to jump. I would love to chat further because I think, as you mentioned, I think there is an opportunity there for how we think about that in a non-capitalist frame, which, as you've raised, raises all sorts of political and economic questions that we are not being asked and they need to. So I think that's awesome.
Yeah, and returning to the position of designers, because then there is again the thing that I think the most. If I think about if you decapitalize the circular economy, or if you create whatever environmental path to or path to work with environmental problems, then what's with designers? What should they have to bring to the table? Because I mean, in most design schools, the focus is on creating solutions. So creating projects that you have something that you can capitalize from, or that you can profit from. But if you cut that, then what?
Well, can you rephrase that question, maybe?
Yeah,
I might be.
Maybe it's about if you decapitalize everything, or if you have an alternative economy, which is, I think, the problem that the circular economy lacks, is this actual alternative to the economy. So if you have a different economic model in which you try to insert design, then what's there for example, for design schools to teach?
Right. Yeah, but luckily in design schools, there's still, they don't actually have to necessarily come out with something that's sellable. So in fact, circular economy is actually quite an interesting pedagogic tool. It's a good strategy for starting to think about why capitalism might not be able to deliver what we need, using things like mapping the circular, trying to make it happen, and then sort of critiquing that process through mapping the circularity, and then really thinking about whether that's going to work or not. So despite the fact that I find it very frustrating that I have to approach it in a very, the constraints of, I mean, I'm the module leader, so I have a certain amount of, control, but it's just such a massive module that there's only so much I can do. And but like within the context, like, so we give our students a circular economy project where they have to come up with a new product based on some industrial waste, and they use systems mapping and to sort of come up with something. But it's within, like, they've only got 6 weeks. There's like a lot of other things that they have to do that's part of it. Some of them don't even really care very much, so they want to mostly focus on branding, so it ends up being like a greenwash project for about a third of them. So there's a lot of other things going on at the same time. So yeah, but in the cases where they are actually committed and passionate about it, then they can sort of really start to unpick why, what's going on, like within the current sort of, they think about the system more sort of holistically. Am I just rambling, or like
No, it makes sense, I think. Yeah, and I agree with you that it might be a good entrance, and but again, I would make the distinction. I would get rid of the economy part, and yeah.
I mean, just to kind of as a general thing, I have a general problem with the word economy, in the fact that it suggests there is one, and I think some of the things that are kind of like some of the sessions that we talked about here is what I think is important, is to recognize that there are multiple economies operating in multiple different ways, and I sometimes think just the notion of the word economy is quite dangerous, because it suggests that we're all working within the same thing for the same reason, and it kind of doesn't allow these sort of different views on what different economies look like and how they function and overlap. So it was just a general point, but it's kind of something that I think about when I see it used as well.
I mean, that's interesting, but there are some constraints that we all have. Like we can make it like economies, like a little context where different values are promoted, like within a co-op, for example. But we all sort of, with our cooperatives, no matter how big, are all subjected to the sort of bigger mega capitalist economy that's international. And yes, so I think that it would be nice to sort of map that space to make that kind of language more explicit, though. So as a way of sort of helping people understand the sort of zones of agency and like the constraints and the tensions.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, for me, it's asking what is the economy and what is it for? And I've even had a provocation, which is, do we even need the economy? Can we leave it? It only rose up with capitalism. There was no such thing as the economy before capitalism. Do we actually need it if we're going to lose capitalism? But in some ways, it's easy. I don't know. Sometimes it's good to make up and throw out words and create new ones, and sometimes it's better to reappropriate and redefine them. So economy might be one of those where we just need to more kind of reshape and redefine what economy means. But there was a question there on economy at all. There's a really good thesis I read around when I was in my research on imaginaries, where they asked people what the economy means to them. And when they spoke with people on a housing estate in the UK, most people responded around the idea that the economy is for rich people and it's not for them. And so the economy is a tool of oppression and exploitation. And I think as we talk about the circular economy, and so I don't know how tangential this is for you, Isaac, but is that who is the circular economy for? I mean, because to be honest, it is still really, is it really a global north term? Is it, who's it really serving? You talk, we have, who's doing the circularizing, the hard work, and who's kind of getting the fun products. But on your other point though about the design and the role for designers, I think at the moment I subscribe more to the kind of social practice theory approach of distributed competence, and it might mean expanding who we think is a designer and who's being trained to design, and perhaps that role exists in so many positions and organizations to really incorporate circularity in everything we're doing. It can't just be designers to do that. That's kind of that there's a role for designers, but there's a role for people in organizations with other roles who are going to be doing the circularizing perhaps, and the design role, if not officially a designer, maybe.
And I agree that's a good point, and that part of the imaginaries and the social practice theory, about how the distributed competences, because I had been also trying to see around the concept of alternative consumption, because I think if you study as it is now, the circular economy, it's pretty much about who produces the things and how they can change. And you forget, our people forgive a lot about how the people are going to be using the products of this circular economy and how they are going to be affected. And actually, there's a group of people in I think it's in Manchester University who are working around the topic of consumption work. So it's about the work that you will have to put to participate in a circular economy. For example, a simple example is now when you have to wash your the packaging to make it recyclable, because most of the packaging cannot be recyclable because they are dirty, or they have some component of other materials that are. So that's part of that work, but then in the future it can be more than that. Yeah, Donna?
Hi. Yeah, thanks. This has been such a great and interesting conversation, because I'm looking at small and local makers of materials that already exist, particularly in clothing. And the whole idea of consumption, especially for things that we don't eat, sounds like we need to come up with, like, the language around that is confusing to me, because we don't eat our clothing or we don't eat things, so we're not consuming them in that way. So I think it's adding to this sort of throwaway, the throwaway culture around it. And I'm just wondering if anyone has any other sort of sources that can speak to different language around that.
When you mean the specific language that you find difficult, is about consumption, or?
Yeah, so we use the word consumption, like, or consumers, as opposed to me. I mean, I hate the word users also. But we use things, like, we borrow them. Honestly, we're not, that's sort of, it's just all tied into this whole language of, capitalist economies, that you buy something, you own it, you throw it away, or you dispose of it, or it goes somewhere that they don't know. But yeah, so the whole idea of consuming is problematic. And I feel like until I find terms or ways to describe another way of engaging with the things that we are ultimately sort of just borrowing for the meantime, because we're all here temporarily also. So I'm just looking for ways to try to explore that narrative and what that might be.
Yeah, I mean the term consumption, because there is a lot of people working on that, and also from the cultural perspective, or from the economic perspective, as how people decide what to do with their financial resources. But then, yeah, what you say, it's true. I personally prefer the word people or citizens instead of consumers, because consumers is also very loaded, and also when you go to the academic literature and you try to read about consumers, it's usually related to how people buy, and it's very focused on that. So the skill that people have, it's a skill as buyers. So you know which supermarket to go to get the things, and yeah.
I have another comment, but I don't want to stop other people.
Go ahead, I think.
Well, you mentioned about the work people have to do for the circularity, and it reminded me of the Diverse Economies Iceberg by Gibson Graham, which I'll post a link here. They've done a lot around feminist economics, and unfortunately I can't place an image, but basically what it shows is the tip of the iceberg is the market and capitalist enterprise and paid labor. And then below the level, what you can't see is everything else that makes all that possible, right? So particularly the household and reproductive economy, like all these things that, the work that goes in to producing workers and keeping people healthy and getting that, to go to work. So generations of knowledge. So I think that's another point you raised, and there's a framework, kind of visual framework around that to think about. Circularity is still just taking the tip of the iceberg and circulating it, rather than thinking about, well, what about people caring for people, right? How does that get incorporated into this and be accounted for, rather than just being exploited as another way to support another form of capitalist economy? So anyway, it came to mind.
Thank you.
In response to Donna's observation, I think that's interesting. I mean, most people who've engaged with sustainability are sort of really frustrated by the language that we have to use for all kinds of, using consumer marketing, all of these things that are sort of are the only way of thinking about our social relations are mediated through this idea of the market, through like using something until it's like totally ruined or depleted. And so it's this whole sort of framework of just use and abuse. So I think that it would be really interesting to come up with a whole sort of network of ideas around, like you said, engaging, that would, or some, like the different, it would be nice to have more of a vocabulary that would be part of the circular economy framework that would involve engaging or like using the materials in a way which wasn't about like leaving a toxic mess behind or leaving nothing behind. So yeah, I think that's kind of that. I think that's an interesting point that you made that could be really fruitful area for exploration. I haven't seen anybody do that yet. Oh, I mean, I have seen people, there are people working on like language of sustainability. What's his name? Australian. He came up with a lot of, somebody working in Australia who came up with a lot of words around our relationships to land and sustainability. Is that anybody familiar with him? I've written about him, but I can't, his name's not accessible to me at the moment. But basically there's a lot of like ideas about like losing your land that you're familiar with, and all these sort of emotional states around our around our relationship with the environmental space. So it would be, and I think that that's really, really important work in sort of mapping out that territory. And so I could see a space for the design community and creating, not, words and also like images that would help people sort of like imagine different relationships within the circular economy.
Yeah, now that you mentioned that, for example, that butterfly diagram from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, that's a visual that it's pervasive, it's everywhere, and it's the first reference that people have, and it presents all the relations. It's just how everything it's control, it's there. It's
And the original one from the RSA, the Royal Society of, or is the RSA, the Royal Society, Royal Academy. Oh, what is it? The Royal Society, the Royal Academy. What is it? The RSA? Yeah,
it's the Royal Society for the Advancement of Manufacturing and the Arts, or something like that.
That's it. I think they had their circular economy image before from the Great Recovery, and then the butterfly came after that, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Because the one was around 2006. I used both.
Yeah, I mean the visual representation, it's something that has been a lot, because there are also many maps of the cradle to cradle and different representations. I think there's, I have seen there's people who do this kind of visual analysis of the different representations, and so it's also an interesting thing that how this visual language is there, and but it's still it's pretty much connected to this division between where manufacture production happens and where waste management happens, in opposition to where life happens.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think it's what you say, it's very important, and and what Donna said about the language, and I think of course there's a lot that designers could do in improving the language, because also I was hearing the session before this one, and they were talking about businesses and how designers don't talk the languages of businesses, and I was thinking, and they were saying, and someone was saying that the designers have to learn to think about KPIs, and I was like
I was a corporate designer for like a long time, so I survived because I learned to speak the two languages until got tired of that. So I just wanted to add one more thing. So the butterfly diagram is very interesting because it has this, like, it shows this divergence of, like, as soon as we extract something from the earth, like, we don't reconnect to the earth at all. So they're like these two separate worlds, and there's no like, how do you bring things back to the earth? So that someone would either say, oh, I'm going to develop biomaterials that are all compostable, or, I'm going to build a washing machine that becomes something else later, or disassemble. So, so I find that a little, like, it was a great idea at the start, but it could develop or be dismantled or disrupted in some way now. Yeah,
although I do think there's, like, I hear you, but I also think that there's a bigger danger in the design community of flattening out the differences between, like, there's a lot of talk right now about entanglement. I don't know if people are familiar with that discourse, and it's especially big in, like, really techie places like MIT. And this idea that everything's just entangled, and that it's like and that's okay. And that's good. That's this new complexity that we live in. But actually, there are things that are okay to be entangled, and there are things that are not okay to be entangled. And the reason why there's two parts of that butterfly diagram is because there's things that are like really toxic and can never go back into the, can't be composted. And until we have some way of like living that doesn't include toxins at all, we need to keep those separate. So I think it's actually very important for us to have that conceptual sort of understanding that there's like very toxic things that have no place in the sort of circular space of everything else. And if you read any of the entanglement literature, I mean, I've written a bit of a critique of it in a book chapter in the handbook for sustainable design, if you're interested.
Okay, yeah. So what's interesting though, because the map doesn't show those traps of toxins, right? They're just sort of like, it still looks like, oh, everything's in this technical cycle going to go around and around.
Yeah, but it kind of does, because that's what they mean. That's
that
was what it was originally about, wasn't it?
Okay.
Yeah, it's constructed on the idea of the waste hierarchy, because if you see from the center to the external circle, it's constructed on the idea that the things will leave once they are in the final the recycling.
I see. Okay, so
that's when they become waste again. But then when they become waste again, as you said, when they become waste, that's what they call leakage. So they go to the environment. But if you are using things at very high or very high rates, because people are consuming very fast, then how long are those cycles? Because that's why I think that if you were instead having a circular economy that is based, for example, in making resource use slower, which is also something that many people propose with the idea of making products last longer. So yeah. Oh yeah, Simon is telling me that he has to go, but also to everyone, because I think we are also over time already. But it's been a very interesting conversation. And
thank you.
Yeah. Thank you all for joining, and thank you for enlightening me.
Isaac, can I just add something?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I just defended my master's thesis at Aalto University in Helsinki, in Finland, about circular economies in the building industry, or healthy circular economies in the building industry. And we'll have a short session with Elise Hodson and Andre, I've got his last name, Andre Elgestad, next week on Thursday, if I'm not mistaken. It would be really lovely to have you there, because I think a lot of the things we talked about today, we were thinking too. Yeah, it was similar questions. So.
Yeah, I will join for sure.
Nice.
Thank you. And thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.